to c4. In the previous video we've checked the moves Queen a4 check and Knight c3 on move 5. We've come to the conclusion that Black is completely fine, and in many lines he can even start pressing himself after only a couple of moves. In this video we will check the move 5 bishop b5 check, which is, in my opinion, the most serious attempt to fight for an opening advantage as white. We will have to know some positions and we need to be a bit prepared, otherwise things could go a bit pear-shaped. I recommend the move 5 knight b to d7. White has two options here, knight c3 and knight f3. We shall start with the move 6 knight f3, a6. White has no less than three options here. 7 bishop e2, bishop takes d7 and bishop a4. Bishop takes d7, queen takes, knight c3 takes, castle will transpose to a line we shall see later, after 6 knight c3. So we will come back to this one. 7 bishop e2 is not critical at all. We play knight b6, castle, g6. We're not in a hurry to take on d5. Knight c3, bishop g7, d4, castle, knight e5, bishop to f5. We develop first all our pieces and then we take on d5. Bishop f3. Now the time has come to cash in the pawn. Rook e1, rook c8, queen b3 and bishop e6. White has not even tried to protect his pawn. It's clear that white has no advantage whatsoever. Black is completely fine. So bishop e2 is no problem. Which leaves us with the third option, bishop a4, b5, bishop b3, bishop b7, castle, knight b6, a4. This is one of the moments where you need to know what you're supposed to do. If you go b4 now, to prevent white's knight from developing to either a3 or c3, and to shut down any queenside activity from white, then you find yourself in deep trouble after a5. Knight takes, and a very nasty check on a4. Knight d7, knight e5, knight f6, d4, followed by, for example, bishop g5, when the knight d7 loses its hold and white is already winning. Black has no time for moves like b4. The correct move is knight b to d5, which is a pawn sacrifice. Takes, takes, takes a8, queen takes, knight c3. And we need to finish our development. e6. White takes the pawn and bishop e7. Black is a pawn down, but is this a problem? I don't think this is a problem, because black has tremendous compensation for it. Black will castle, finish his development. His queen and his bishop are very nicely placed on the long diagonal, and they exert some very nice pressure. The knight on d5 is an octopus. It will never be removed whatsoever. It will control the game. White is currently a pawn up, but these pawns are very weak, d2 and b2. The bishop on c1 has nowhere to go. White's pieces are all scattered and there is no coordination. What black will do is he will castle and then he will maybe play rook to b8, putting white under pressure along the b file. All in all, I cannot see a real plan for white. However, black does have active ideas, and I'm absolutely sure that black's activity compensates for the missing pawn. Play could continue d3, castle, bishop g5, and queen b8, putting pressure along the b file and also controlling the h2 b8 diagonal. The rook will most likely come to d8, putting the d3 pawn under pressure. White is still a pawn up, but I cannot see how white will untangle himself here. Black's compensation is sufficient and secures at least equality. That's about it about knight f3. Let's talk about knight c3, the most critical one. a6, queen a4. Bishop d7 is not particularly problematic. Black takes it with a queen. Why doesn't black take it with the bishop? The bishop on c8 is not all that bad, because in most positions black is happy to put his bishop on b7, play b5 and bishop b7, putting the d5 pawn under pressure. Which is why the bishop is quite nicely placed on c8 for the now. Queen takes d7 also puts the d5 pawn under pressure. Knight f3, knight takes, castle e6, knight e5, takes, queen c7, d4, bishop d6, bishop a3. This might come as a shock, but it's nothing. We just take it. Queen a4 check, b5, queen a3. And now bishop b7. This bishop is a real powerhouse on b7. For the moment black cannot castle, but black will play queen e7, and after that he can castle. The rook will come to c8, putting the c3 pawn under pressure. And with a bishop as strong as this one on b7, only black can be better. But I think the position is objectively still around equal. But black has all reasons to be happy here. Queen a4 is the better move, and here black can play rook b8 or g6. My recommendation is rook b8, but g6 is also quite playable. The problem with g6 is that it is hard to win a game with this. The rising position is very drawish, and for players like us who want to play for a win, it is maybe not the best option. After g6, knight f3, bishop g7, castle, bishop d7, bishop takes, queen b3, b5, d4, bishop c8. This is a typical rerouting of the bishop from d7 to b7. You should keep that in mind. This is a very prominent feature of this opening with c4 and bishop b5. Bishop g5, bishop b7, takes, a4, b4. This is now a real pawn sacrifice. Takes. We reach this position when black is a pawn down, but the pawns on b2 and d4 are very weak. Black will follow up with rook b8 and rook d8. And what is likely is a mass exchange on d4, and the game will soon peter out in a draw. This is why I recommend rook b8, to keep some tension and to maintain the possibility to play for a win. Bishop takes d7, queen takes. White has two moves here. Queen takes d7 and queen b3. After queen b3, b5, knight f3, bishop b7. White has two moves, knight e5 and castle. Castle is too slow to cause any trouble. Bishop d5, knight takes, knight e5, queen b7, d4, e6, queen g3. And here it is important to remember a very nice idea. If you do not remember this idea, you will be in trouble. So this is really important now. Knight e7. What is the idea of knight e7? The idea of knight e7 is to go knight f5 and protect the g7 pawn. Once the g7 pawn is protected, we can develop our pieces and castle and be extremely happy about the position, because white has an isolated pawn, black has full control over d5 and over f5, and I would already rather beat black, even though the position is still equal at this point. So instead of castle, white can play knight e5, queen d8. Again, white has two moves, d4 or castle. If he castles now, knight takes d5. When knight b5 runs into bishop a8 and white loses a piece, d4 is mandatory, and f6. f6 looks very awkward, but it is not half as bad as it looks. Knight d3, forcing the knight back. Knight takes c3, b takes, rook c8, rook e1, and queen d5, exerting pressure along the diagonal h1 a8. And if the queens come off the board, the pawn on c3 will be very weak, the rook on c8 will be ideally placed. Black will play something like king f7, e6, freeing himself and the bishop on f8, and the position is very, very fine for black. So, if white plays d4, move 12, we play knight takes d5, castle, f4, f6, knight d3, knight takes, and again rook c8, which would transpose to the variation we have seen earlier after rook e1 and queen d5. All that's left is queen d7 instead of queen b3 on move 9. Bishop takes, d4. If white goes knight f3, we play rook d8, b3, bishop f5, bishop b2, we pick up the pawn, knight takes, rook takes, and it's clear that things have already gone awry for white. Black has two bishops, d4 pawn is a weakness, black is already a bit better here. 10 d4 is the best move, rook d8, bishop g5, bishop f5, takes, and I give this position as complicated and with compensation for black. You may wonder why that is, because black is seemingly a pawn down for nothing. However, first, black has two bishops against the two knights, which is in the long run better for black. Secondly, black can play on the g file with rook g8 and attack the g2 pawn. Then, thirdly, there is the typical idea to play b5, bishop c8, bishop b7, again attacking the d5 pawn. White's knight on c3 is stuck. It has to protect the d5 pawn, it cannot do anything else. Which makes it very hard for white to actually come up with a plan. There is no real plan for white, at least I can see none. And yeah, I already showed how black can make progress in this position. I think that the compensation is full and satisfying and that black has absolutely nothing to worry about. Which kind of closes the bishop b5 chapter. It is an interesting chapter. It creates more problems than fifth move knight to c3 or queen a4, but I think also after bishop b5